When the world suddenly strips away absolutely every modern comfort you've got, what's left? Honestly, just the raw, primal will to live. Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're totally skipping the dry, boring facts. Instead, we're diving headfirst into some of the most mind-blowing true historical stories of human endurance ever recorded. We're looking at the sheer, overwhelming power of nature, but more importantly, we're going to focus on the incredible emotional resilience it takes to survive against completely impossible odds.
Okay, let's just jump right in with a number, 21,000. I want you to literally imagine free-falling 21,000 feet, still strapped to your airplane seat, by the way, plunging through a violent, pitch-black Amazonian thunderstorm. Sounds like a movie, right? But that is exactly what happened to 17-year-old Juliane Koepke on Christmas Eve in 1971. Her flight was struck by lightning, and the plane just disintegrated around her.
Or try picturing a totally different kind of nightmare. 438. Imagine drifting for 438 days across 6,700 miles of the open Pacific Ocean. That's well over a year. That was the terrifying reality for fisherman Jose Salvador Alvarenga. His boat's motor just died during a storm, throwing him completely at the mercy of the elements for 14 months.
So, the catalyst. When nature strikes, every single survival story we're looking at today begins right here with a terrifying catalyst. It's that singular, horrifying moment when the sudden, overwhelming power of nature thrusts ordinary people into completely impossible situations. I mean, everything changes in the literal blink of an eye.
And you know, nature's hostility takes so many different forms. One moment, it's 20-foot rogue ocean waves relentlessly battering a tiny fiberglass boat, flooding the whole thing and sweeping away vital gear. But then, in a totally different environment, it's a swirling, blinding wall of yellow sand swallowing former Olympian Mauro Prosperi whole while he was running a marathon in the Sahara Desert. Nature shifts instantly from totally normal conditions to life-threatening extremes.
Isolation and despair. Because surviving that initial, violent strike, that's really only the beginning. Once the chaos of the catalyst finally subsides, survivors are left with this crushing realization of utter isolation. And this is exactly where the heavy, often just unbearable psychological toll of despair really begins to set in.
Just try to imagine the profound, deafening loneliness of Ada Blackjack. She was a 23-year-old Inupiaq seamstress left as the absolute sole survivor on a freezing Arctic island for 2 whole years. Or think about Poon Lim, a Chinese sailor bobbing entirely alone on a tiny 8-foot wooden raft in the South Atlantic for 133 days after a World War II U-boat sank his ship. They had absolutely no one to rely on but themselves.
And you know, the descent into despair can happen terrifyingly fast, as we see with Mauro Prosperi in the Sahara. Day 1, he's swallowed by the sandstorm. By day 2, he finds some brief shelter in an empty burial shrine. On day 3, he attempts a smoke signal, but it gets ruined by yet another storm, which just ignites this horrific, riveting anger within him. And by day 4, entirely out of hope and severely dehydrated, he actually starts planning to end his own life.
Now, what's really striking here is that Prosperi wasn't just afraid of dying. His despair was surprisingly practical. As he put it, he realized that if his body vanished into the shifting desert sands and was never found, his wife and kids back in Italy wouldn't even receive his police pension. That one singular thought is what drove him to the very edge of the abyss.
The will to live. Gruesome adaptations. Because incredibly, it's exactly in this darkest hour, right at the very bottom of the void, that the human will to live suddenly activates. This raw, primal instinct forces these survivors to make horrific choices and undergo some seriously grueling physical adaptations, all just to see tomorrow. Let's put you in the shoes of climber Simon Yates for a second, high up in the freezing Andes. Imagine facing an absolutely impossible choice. Your climbing partner, Joe Simpson, is hanging entirely off of a cliff with a shattered leg. He's actively pulling you down the mountain. You can't communicate with him, you can't pull him up, and the snow beneath your feet is actively collapsing. So, what do? Do you cut the rope to save yourself, knowing for a fact it's going to send your partner plummeting to his death?
Well, Yates made the horrific choice to cut the rope. But miraculously, the fall didn't kill Simpson. No way! He survived a 200-foot drop into a dark crevasse. And over the next 3 agonizing days, he abseiled deeper to find a snow bridge, climbed out, and literally crawled his way back to camp over 5 miles of jagged glacial terrain. Oh, and he did all of this with a crushed tibia. It's just a completely unbelievable testament to sheer human determination.
But survival isn't just about pain.
it also demands brilliant ingenuity. Poon Lim didn't just throw his hands up and accept starvation at sea when his ship's rations ran out. Instead, he reverse-engineered survival from absolute scraps. We're talking removing a spring from his flashlight to shape a fishhook, unraveling a hemp rope to craft a fishing line, and improvising a knife out of an old pemmican tin. Just incredibly resourceful.
Similarly, Jose Salvador Alvarenga pushed his biology to the absolute limit. To survive his 14-month drift, he caught triggerfish with his bare hands. He lured and ate raw seabirds. And to fight off severe dehydration, he drank raw turtle blood, collected rainwater in empty plastic bottles, and look, when there was absolutely no rain, he even resorted to drinking his own urine. It is a staggering display of what the human body can endure.
And honestly, perhaps the most visceral story of all is what young Juliane Kupke had to do in the Amazon. After days of wandering, she found a wrecked jungle boat that still had some fuel left. Remembering her father's advice for treating animals, she poured the gasoline directly into a deeply infected wound on her arm. She just sat there, enduring agonizing pain, and extracted 35 flesh-eating maggots as they slipped out of her skin. Wow. Meanwhile, back in the cold, Ada Blackjack's Arctic grit is just legendary. Keep in mind, she originally signed on to this doomed expedition just to sew clothes and earn a little money for her 6 sons' tuberculosis treatment. But when left completely alone, she tapped into this incredible inner strength. She cared for a dying crewmate, taught herself to trap animals in the snow, hauled heavy wood across the ice, made her own protective clothing, and successfully defended her camp from roaming polar bears. She absolutely became a force of nature.
Defying the odds, and the return to the living. Because all of this immense suffering, all of these grueling, gruesome adaptations we just talked about, they ultimately bring us to the most incredible final stage of the survival arc, defying the absolute worst odds imaginable and making a miraculous return to the living.
Against all odds, salvation eventually came, and often from the most unexpected places. Alvarenga miraculously washed ashore on a coral reef in the Marshall Islands after 438 days. Poon Lim was spotted and pulled from the ocean by Brazilian fishermen. And Juliane Kupke, she followed a river, just like her dad taught her, and stumbled right into a missionary camp after 11 terrifying days alone in the dense jungle.
However, the story rarely actually ends at rescue. The immediate relief of physical survival is almost always quickly replaced by the heavy burden of trauma. For instance, upon his return, Alvarenga didn't just face massive media scrutiny. He was actually hit with a devastating lawsuit from his deceased crewmate's family, alleging the unthinkable, cannibalism. The mental battle continues long after the physical one ends.
Climber Joe Simpson beautifully captured this profound psychological transformation. He noted that having the experience of dying actually strips away the normal, everyday rationalizations and denials we all live with. When you've touched the void and actually returned, your perspective on human existence is fundamentally and permanently altered. Which leaves us with a final question for you to ponder. If the overwhelming power of nature suddenly stripped away absolutely all your modern comforts, your technology, your safety nets, what lengths would you really go to? Would you have the innate grit to survive the void?